The first clue is not a monster in the dark, but a line of frightened gods pressed into clay. Hey there, come closer to the fire for a moment, because the old tablets do not begin with peace. They begin with heat, dust, lavor, hunger, and a strange trace of panic. In the oldest stories from the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the beings later remembered as the Anunnaki do not always look like calm gods seated above the world. Sometimes they look like rulers under pressure. Sometimes they look like engineers whose work has gone wrong. And sometimes, most strangely of all, they look like beings who left behind empty temples, vanished statues, sealed rooms, and a silence so complete that generations of priests kept whispering into it, waiting for an answer that never came. That is the path we are following tonight. If you enjoy quiet stories about dark history, old gods, buried tablets, and mysteries that refuse to sleep, leave a gentle like and subscribe. It helps this small fire reach other wanderers who are listening in the dark. Now let the room settle around you. Let the candlelight soften the corners. No need to do anything special with your breathing. Just let the story move slowly, like river water under moonlight. In the dry south of Iraq, where the old rivers once made a cradle for the first cities humanity remembers, the earth still holds its memory in clay. The land is flat in a way that feels older than thought. The horizon is low and wide. The wind carries dust over broken brick and salt crust and the pale remains of walls that once held prayers, ledgers, hymns, grain, fear, and power. If you stand there at evening, when the heat begins to loosen its grip, the silence can feel almost alive. Not empty. Waiting. The Tigris and Euphrates move through the story like two long breaths. They fed the marshes. They flooded the fields. They gave life and took it back. Around them, human beings learned to count grain, shape mud brick, watch the sky, measure seasons, write names, and speak to gods through temples that rose from the plain like stairways made of earth. And from that earth came clay tablets. It is a humble thing, clay. It does not shine like gold. It does not sing like bronze. It sits in the hand with the weight of something ordinary. Wet clay accepts pressure. A reed stylus touches it and leaves a wedge. Another wedge. Another. A human hand moves slowly across the surface, and a thought becomes a mark. Then the clay dries. Sometimes it is baked by choice, sometimes by fire and ruin. And somehow, after kings are forgotten and walls collapse and languages vanish from living mouths, the clay remains. Honestly, I have always found that more haunting than any ghost. A palace can fall. A whole city can become a mound. A god can become a name in a footnote. But a small tablet, pressed by a scribe who probably had sore fingers and a bad back, and perhaps a very ordinary worry about supper, can survive 5,000 years and wait under dust until someone reads it again. Many of these tablets now rest in museums far from the rivers that gave them life. They lie in drawers, trays, storerooms, climate-controlled silence. There are labels. There are catalogs. There are gloves. There is the soft hum of modern light. If you were standing beside me in one of those quiet rooms, you might expect the ancient world to announce itself with thunder. It does not. It waits politely under glass. It lets you lean closer. It offers rows of small wedge marks, and somehow those marks begin to open. Among the names written into that silence is one of the most famous and most debated, the Anunnaki. The word appears in early Sumerian and later Mesopotamian traditions. Scholars have studied it for more than a century, and even now it carries uncertainty. At its core, it seems connected with the high gods, the princely offspring of Anu, the royal divine beings tied to heaven, authority, and fate. The word moved through Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian worlds, and like all old words that travel through empires, it gathered layers. Some alternative writers have offered a more dramatic reading, those who from heaven to earth came. We should be careful here. Some scholars argue that this interpretation stretches the language beyond what the texts can safely bear. It is debated. It sits outside mainstream agreement. But the reason it has such power is easy to understand. It turns a divine title into a memory of arrival. It turns gods into visitors. It turns myth into something that sounds almost physical, almost historical, almost like a report from a world that did not know the difference between temple and landing place. Those who came down, those who ruled, those who left. The old texts do not give us one smooth story. They give fragments, creation epics, flood accounts, lists of kings with impossible reigns, cylinder seals rolled across wet clay, temple records, hymns, laments, omens, broken passages where the missing pieces feel as loud as the surviving words. The Enuma Elish, found among the ruins of Nineveh. The Atrahasis epic, older in its roots than the flood story most people know. Countless seals showing gods on thrones, gods receiving offerings, gods beside smaller human figures, gods connected to symbols of sky, water, power, and rule. Picture one of those small stone cylinders in the hand. Cool, smooth, carved with scenes so tiny they seem impossible. The scribe presses it to wet clay and rolls it slowly. A world appears in miniature. A seated god. A worshipper. A star. A flowing vessel. A being who seems too large for the human figures beside him. The image is small, but the claim is enormous. The gods were present. The gods acted. The gods were involved in the ordering of life. The pantheon described in these traditions is not a loose gathering of dreamy spirits. It feels organized. It has ranks, duties, councils, arguments, commands. This is one of the strange things about Mesopotamian myth. The gods do not simply float around being holy. They administer. They decide. They assign labor. They complain. They hold meetings. They behave, in some ways, like a powerful ruling class with very old paperwork. At the height stands Anu, the Sky Father, the one whose name is tied to heaven itself. He is distant, elevated, almost too far away to touch the earth directly. He rules from above, as high rulers often do, letting others carry out the difficult work below. Then there is Enlil, Lord of Command, stern and heavy with authority. In the stories, Enlil often feels like a door closing. He is order. He is hierarchy. He is the voice that says enough. If humanity becomes too loud, too numerous, too troublesome, Enlil notices. He does not seem fond of disorder, and he does not hide his anger well. I admit, every old pantheon has at least one figure who seems like he would ruin a dinner party by insisting everyone sit according to rank. And in these stories, Enlil often has that energy. Then there is Enki, later called Ea, Lord of Wisdom and Fresh Water. Enki is different. He thinks around corners. His domain is the Apsu, the deep, sweet water beneath the earth, a hidden ocean imagined below the visible world. Where Enlil commands, Enki calculates. Where Enlil judges, Enki negotiates. He is the clever one, the problem solver, the one who can speak to a wall of reeds and still somehow save a life. Beside them stands Ninhursag, the mother goddess, the birth goddess, the shaper of bodies. Her names change across places and periods. Ninma, Ninto, Mami, but her role remains warm and unsettling. She knows how life is made. She is clay under the hand. She is womb and breath. She is the sacred knowledge of flesh. Around these great figures are many other divine beings. Among them are the Anunnaki proper, the high gods who sit in council, and the Igigi, a lower order, remembered as workers. Their name is debated too, but their story is clear enough. They carried burdens. They dug. They labored. They became tired. And that is where the ancient account becomes quietly shocking. Because before humans appear, before our species is shaped from clay and divine blood, the story begins with exhausted gods. Not singing gods. Not perfect gods. Not radiant beings in effortless bliss. Tired gods. Resentful gods. Workers who have had enough. The Atrahasis epic opens with a crisis of labor. When the gods instead of man did the work and bore the loads, the burden was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. That is the beginning. Not a garden, not a paradise. A workload. Let the image form slowly. The marshlands are wide and wet beneath a hot sky. Reeds tremble in the wind. Insects hum over the brown water. Mud sucks at the feet. The rivers must be managed, because a river is never only kind. It feeds, then floods. It gives, then takes. Channels must be cut. Canals must be cleared. Banks must be strengthened and repaired. Earth must be lifted in baskets and carried away, again and again, until the body knows the shape of the task better than the mind does. The Igigi bend to the work. A tool enters the clay. A basket fills. A shoulder takes the weight. Footsteps press into wet ground and vanish under more mud. The sun climbs. The air thickens. Water glints in the distance. beautiful and merciless. No one who has ever done heavy work in heat would need this explained. The body becomes a clock made of pain. Morning is the back. Noon is the hands. Evening is the knees. The texts suggest this labor went on for a long time. 40 years. Perhaps symbolic. Perhaps simply a way of saying too long. Long enough for complaint to become anger. Long enough for anger to become planning. Long enough for divine workers to look toward the higher gods, shaded and honored, and feel the first spark of rebellion. There are also references to the Abzu, the deep region connected with Enki. In traditional understanding, this is the subterranean freshwater ocean, a sacred depth beneath the world. Some alternative researchers have wondered whether certain passages could imply mining or extraction from physical places as well as mythic ones. Some even connect the idea to ancient gold mining, though that remains speculative and is not accepted by mainstream archaeology. Still, the question lingers like smoke under a ceiling. Why would gods need workers? Why would gods need earth cut open? Why would heavenly beings care about canals, clay, minerals, and mud? The texts do not stop to explain. They simply preserve the pressure. And then, one night, or onne dafn, or 1 hour when patience had finally worn thin, the Igigi gathered at the gate of Enlil. I imagine the air before sunrise, cool for a brief moment before the heat returns. The temple walls rising dark against a paling sky. The workers approaching not with songs, but with tools in their hands. The tools are important. They are not props. They are the shape of suffering. The handles worn smooth, the edges dulled, the baskets stained with earth. The workers bring the evidence of what has been done to them. Then they burn the tools. A small fire becomes a declaration. Wood cracks. Smoke climbs. Metal darkens. Sparks lift into the air like little stars trying to escape gravity. The flames lick at the instruments of labor, and in that glow, the rebellion becomes more than refusal. It becomes ritual. The Igigi are saying, without needing many words, this burden will not continue. Enlil is furious. Of course he is. Power rarely enjoys being interrupted by the ones who keep it comfortable. He wants punishment. He wants order restored. He wants the rebellion crushed so thoroughly that the memory of it becomes afraid of itself. But Enki sees another path. If the workers will not work, create a worker. It is such a calm solution that it becomes more chilling than rage. No need to ask whether the system is just. No need to lighten the burden. No need to persuade the Igigi back into obedience. Make another being. Make something intelligent enough to follow instructions, strong enough to labor, mortal enough to control, and limited enough not to join the divine workers in rebellion. Let there be a primitive worker, the proposal says in spirit. Let man bear the yoke of the gods. The word yoke is heavy. You can feel it across the shoulders. It is not a crown. It is not a blessing. In this version of the story, humanity is not created first for glory, or romance, or moral testing. Humanity is created because someone else is tired. That is a dark thought, but let it rest softly. We are not here to make it sharp. We are here to notice how old the question is. What are we? Children of gods. Servants of gods. Accidents of mud and blood. A solution to someone else's problem. The Divine Council accepts Enki's plan. Ninhursag, the mother and shaper, joins the work. The creation of humanity begins, not in a bright garden, but in something closer to a sacred laboratory. Though, of course, that word is ours, not theirs. Still, the procedure described in the texts has a strange, almost technical feeling. A god must be chosen. A god with intelligence. A god whose essence can be mixed into clay. The old word for understanding, the quality that gives mind and awareness, is sometimes rendered as something like reason or intelligence. The chosen divine being is sacrificed. His blood and flesh are mixed with clay from the earth, from the deep, from the Apsu. Earthly matter and divine substance become one dark mixture. Clay remembers the hand. Blood remembers life. Together, in the mythic imagination, they become us. The mixture is divided. Male and female portions. Birth goddesses receive it. There is waiting. Gestation. Silence. The slow interior work by which hidden life takes form. And then the first humans are born. Not as kings. Not as philosophers. Not yet as dreamers under stars. Workers. The gods celebrate because the labor problem has been solved. The Agigi are relieved. The canals can be dug. The fields can be tended. Offerings can be prepared. The divine order can continue without divine shoulders carrying the mud. But the story has already made a dangerous thing. Because humans are not simple tools. The clay has been mixed with the substance of a god. The new beings can understand. They can feel. They can remember pain. They can hear commands and wonder who gave them. They can look at the sky. And a being that can look at the sky may not remain forever content in the mud. So the first part of the mystery settles quietly into place. The Anunnaki, in these old accounts, are not distant symbols only. They are rulers, planners, makers, and sometimes anxious administrators of a project that may have grown beyond them. Humanity begins as a solution to divine exhaustion, but inside that solution is a spark no one fully controls. Outside, the rivers keep breathing through the dark. In the museum drawer, the tablets wait. Near the fire, the room is quiet. And somewhere beyond the first clay marks, the workers are about to open their eyes. The first humans in the old story do not wake beneath a gentle blessing. They wake beneath a task. The clay is still damp in the imagination. The divine mixture has only just become flesh. The breath of life has entered bodies made for labor, and the gods, who were weary of digging and hauling and bending, but watch their new solution take its first unsteady place in the world. There is something tender here, even though the purpose is not tender. A new being always carries wonder. even if made for work, even if shaped by command, even if born under the shadow of a yoke, the first human opening the eyes would still be a small miracle. The chest rises. The fingers curl. The mouth fills with air. The skin feels warmth, dust, water, the nearness of other bodies. Somewhere close by, a god watches and perhaps feels satisfaction. Somewhere else, another god perhaps feels doubt. The texts do not linger on that doubt, but we may. Slowly, softly. The story is old enough to allow a little candlelight in the cracks. The Igigi no longer have to carry the same burden. The canals still need clearing, but now human hands grip the tools. The riverbanks still fail, but human backs lift the baskets. The fields still demand water, but human feet walk the muddy channels at dawn. The gods have solved their labor crisis by creating a mortal workforce, intelligent enough to understand orders, limited enough to be ruled, numerous enough to replace those divine workers who burned their tools at Enlil's gate. Picture the first mornings. Mist low over the marsh. The smell of wet reeds and animal breath. A pale rim of light spreading over the flat land. People moving before they have fully learned what it means to be people. Hands touch mud brick. Hands gather grain. Hands press into clay. A body stoops, lifts, turns, carries, sets down, and stoops again. The motion repeats until it becomes a rhythm. Work becomes day. Day becomes season. Season becomes memory. The gods receive offerings now. Bread, beer, smoke, oil, meat. The temple tables are no longer empty. The divine households are maintained. If the old stories are read on their own terms, the gods depended on those offerings. Not perhaps as humans depend on food, but in the ritual economy of the world, the relationship mattered. Humans worked. Humans fed the gods. The gods maintained order. Everyone had a place. For a time, the system appears to hold. This is the strange golden age hidden inside a story of servitude. Gods and humans coexist. The temples are not empty monuments yet. They are living houses. The sacred rooms are tended as if someone real resides there. The statues are washed, dressed, perfumed, fed, awakened in the morning, and put to rest at night. The priests move with careful hands because every gesture matters. A bowl placed incorrectly, a hymn spoken carelessly, a lamp left untended. These are not small mistakes in a world where heaven and earth touch through ritual. If you were standing there with me in the dark before dawn, you might hear the priest's bare feet on packed earth. Soft steps, a linen hem brushing the ankle, the faint clink of a vessel, the breath held for a moment before a curtain is drawn aside. The inner room smells of oil, incense, warm bread, old stone, and something harder to name, the charged quiet of a place where people believe they are not alone. Enlil, Enki's city. Water is always near the imagination. Even when the air is dry, the Abzu lies beneath. deep and hidden. Enki is the clever giver of arts. In later traditions, sages connected to the waters, often called Apkallu or Abgalu, bring knowledge to humanity. They are strange figures, sometimes described or shown with fish-like cloaks, emerging from the water as teachers. They bring writing, measurement, ritual, medicine, law, the early skills of civilization. It is a beautiful image, and an eerie one. A figure rises from the dark water at daybreak. Reeds part. Droplets run from a cloak shaped like a fish skin. In one hand, perhaps a tablet. In another, perhaps a measuring cord. The people watch. No one speaks loudly. Even the birds seem to hold back for a breath. The teacher steps onto the bank and shows them how to make a mark that can outlive a voice. This is how civilization grows in the old imagination. Not by accident only. Not by slow trial alone. It is taught, delivered, given, or, if we are more cautious, remembered as given. Some scholars would say these stories explain cultural development through myth. People learned agriculture, writing, law, and astronomy, then told stories in which divine sages taught those arts. That is reasonable. It may be true, but the story itself remembers instruction. It remembers a time when knowledge came from above, or from the deep, or from beings who were not quite human. Enlil, meanwhile, maintains order. His temples and priesthoods become centers of command, law, and social rhythm. The calendar is sacred. The city is sacred. The king rules under divine authority. Nothing is merely practical. A canal is also cosmic order. A storehouse is also divine economy. A city wall is also a boundary against chaos. Ninhursag remains behind the living mystery of bodies. Birth continues. Families grow. Children cry in courtyards. Women grind grain. Men shape bricks. Old people sit in the shade and remember when the settlement was smaller. Dogs sleep near doorways. Smoke rises from cooking fires. The first cities spread outward, not quickly in the way modern cities do, but steadily, like wet clay pressed wider under the palm. Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Nippur. The names themselves feel like stones in the mouth. Short, Alsio, heavy. And as the cities grow, humanity changes. This is where the first trouble returns, quietly at first. Humans were made to labor, but they do more than labor. They multiply. They organize. They speak. They sing. They complain. They desire. They bury their dead and remember them. They learn from one another. They pass skills down. They invent new habits that no god directly commanded. They become noisy. The Atrahasis tradition says that human noise disturbed Enlil. The word is often translated as noise, but some scholars have wondered if it means more than sound. Perhaps social disorder. Perhaps overpopulation. Perhaps the dense, restless vitality of human life, spreading beyond the limits originally intended. Anyone who has lived near a busy market might sympathize a little, though perhaps not enough to flood the world. A little grumbling. Yes. Cosmic extermination. No. Imagine the sound of early humanity growing. Pestles striking grain. Children calling. Animals bleeding. Wheels creaking. Water slapping against the sides of reed boats. Workers shouting across canals. Priests chanting. Women laughing near ovens. Men arguing over measures of barley. A singer repeating an old tale after sunset. Bricks being stacked. Gates opening. Feet on packed streets. To us, it is life. To Enlil, perhaps, it was hubbub, disorder. A signal that the created beings were becoming too many, too active, too difficult to contain. The old texts describe attempts to reduce humanity. Plague, drought, famine. Each time, Enki intervenes or instructs the human favorite, Atrahasis, so that some survive. The pattern is important. Enlil sees a problem and moves toward reduction. Enki sees the same problem and moves toward preservation. Their conflict is not only between two gods, it is between two attitudes toward humanity: control and care, order and clever mercy, authority and affection. And while this tension grows, something more troubling enters the story. The boundaries between gods and humans begin to blur. Later Hebrew tradition says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and took them as wives. From these unions came the Nephilim, a word debated in meaning, sometimes connected with giants, fallen ones, or mighty beings. The passage is brief, but it casts a long shadow. It suggests a time when divine and human lines mixed, and the offspring became heroes of old, men of renown. The Mesopotamian material has its own fragments and parallels. Gods mate with humans. Goddesses bear children with mortal partners. Kings claim divine ancestry. Heroes stand between categories. Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk, is called 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. That is a strange ratio, almost comically precise in its confidence, as if someone in the ancient world had a celestial measuring cup. But beneath the oddness is a serious idea. Some beings walked the earth who were not merely human, and not fully divine either. Hybrid figures are always dangerous in myth. They cross lines that power depends on keeping clear. If humans are only workers, they can be managed. If gods are only gods, they can rule. But if a child carries both, what then? What happens when the servant species begins to contain the bloodline of the masters? What happens when divine intelligence is no longer a spark inside clay, but a growing inheritance? What happens when rulers look at their own creations and begin to recognize something too familiar looking back? The texts do not explain all of this directly. We are following hints, parallels, and later echoes. We must keep saying that gently. We cannot be sure, but the story's emotional logic is powerful. Humanity was created to bear a burden. Humanity multiplied. Humanity learned. Humanity mixed with the divine. Humanity became more than expected. From Enlil's point of view, this may have looked less like success and more like a project escaping its design. You know that feeling when something you made begins doing what you did not intend? A small machine that rattles in the wrong way. A story that runs away from the author. A child who repeats your words back to you with better timing than you expected. It can be funny. It can be beautiful. It can also be frightening. If control is what you love most. The source story suggests that the gods may have feared human trajectory. Not what humans were that day, but what they were becoming. A short-lived creature can still build memory if there are enough of them. A servant can become a student. A student can become a rival. A rival can become an heir. The old king lists make the feeling stranger. Before the flood, rulers are said to reign for impossible spans, tens of thousands of years in some cases. Mainstream scholars often read these as symbolic, mythic, or ideological numbers. That is sensible. Ancient kingship loved grandeur. Yet within the story world, the numbers matter. They suggest a before time when life and rule stretched far beyond normal limits. After the flood, the numbers shrink. Reigns become shorter. Human life declines toward the scale we know. Shrinking numbers become a motif of loss. Imagine a scribe reading the list by lamplight. A king who ruled for 28,800 years. Another for 36,000. The numbers feel like mountains. Then later, centuries. Then decades. The line descends. The candle burns lower. The human span narrows. If one were reading these myths through an alternative lens, the reduction of lifespan might look deliberate, not merely punishment, but limitation. A way to prevent memory from accumulating too deeply in one body. A way to ensure that every generation must begin again with less. A way to slow the rise of a species that had become too capable. Again, we cannot prove this. It is an interpretation, not a settled fact. But as a story, it fits the mood of anxiety that gathers around the gods. Population limits fail. Drought fails. Plague fails. Human cleverness continues. Divine bloodlines leak through the walls of hierarchy. The noise rises. And then comes the flood. Not yet the full flood. Not in this breath. For now, only the warning of it. The air changes. Every old flood story has a moment before the water, a pause when the world seems to inhale. The cattle are restless. The birds shift in the reeds. The river looks normal, but not quite. Clouds gather where the sky had been empty. Far away, perhaps, the gods meet in council, and the words spoken there are not meant for human ears. Enlil wants an end to the noise. Enki listens and thinks of one man, Atrahasis, the exceedingly wise one, the human who has learned how to hear what is not said directly. In the famous scene, Enki does not openly betray the divine decision. Instead, he speaks to a reed water, and the warning passes through. Wall, listen to me. Reed, wall, pay attention to all my words. It is one of the most haunting images in ancient literature. A god whispering to a wall so a man can hear without the god technically speaking to him. Clever, yes. Almost funny in a dry, divine way. Like someone obeying the letter of a rule while walking around its soul. But beneath the cleverness is urgency. Build. Prepare. Preserve life. The human story continues because a warning slips through reeds. Let us stay a moment with that reed wall. It is not grand, not marble, not gold, just reeds woven together, the kind of material that rustles when the wind touches it. In a world of high gods and cosmic decrees, survival comes through something humble, a wall that listens, a whisper that leaks, a man awake enough to understand. The flood will become the hinge of everything. But before the waters rise, it is important to feel what has been built. Humans are no longer only clay workers fresh from creation. They have cities, temples, skills, families, songs, burial places, names. They have begun to remember themselves. The gods may still stand above them, but the distance has narrowed. The created have become a people. That is what makes the coming catastrophe feel so dark. Not because the story needs terror. It does not. The old tablets are quiet enough. But because the flood, if read in this strange way, is not simply a punishment. It may also be concealment, a covering, a way for divine absence to be explained as divine wrath, a way for beings who wished to leave, or needed to leave, to let water erase the evidence of departure. The source we are following asks us to look carefully at the gods during the flood. Not only at humanity below, not only at the vessel and the rain, but at the gods themselves. What do they do when the storm comes? Do they sit in calm judgment? Do they watch like kings, satisfied with a sentence carried out? No. The old account says they flee upward. They cower like dogs by a wall. They weep. They grow hungry without offerings. They are afraid. That detail waits ahead, dark and luminous as a lamp in deep water. For now, the first human age trembles on the edge of its ending. The cities breathe in the warm night. The temples glow with oil lamps. Somewhere, a child sleeps beside a wall of mud brick, unaware that the gods have held council. Somewhere, a priest places bread before a divine statue. Somewhere, Enki's warning moves through reeds, soft as wind. The fire beside us burns lower, but not out. The room is calm. The clay remembers. And in the distance, beyond the river dark, the first rain begins. The first rain does not fall like punishment. It falls like a secret being released too late. At first, it is only a change in the air. The night over the river grows heavy. The reeds become still. The cattle lift their heads from the dark grass and listen to something that has not yet arrived. Far above the flat land, The clouds gather without hurry, but with a kind of certainty that makes the human heart uneasy before it understands why. In the house of Atrahasis, the warning has already passed through the reed wall. Not shouted, not carved on a stone gate, not announced by a trumpet from heaven, whispered. That is what makes it feel so human. A god with the mind of water bends the law without breaking it, and speaks to reeds, and a man hears what he is meant to hear. Build. Prepare. Take life into the vessel. I imagine Atrahasis standing very still after the voice has faded. You know that feeling when the room has changed, though nothing visible has moved. The mat is still on the floor. The lamp still burns. The wall is still woven from reeds, harmless and ordinary. But now it has become a door. It has carried a warning from a place no human should overhear. Outside, perhaps a dog barks once and stops. Perhaps a child turns in sleep. Perhaps the river makes its normal sound against the bank. Soft, patient, almost kind. The terrible thing about catastrophe is that the world often looks ordinary just before it opens. Atrahasis begins the work. The story does not need to rush here. Let the hands move slowly. Let the timber be measured. Let the pitch warm and soften. Let ropes be pulled across rough palms. Let clay jars be filled. Let grain be gathered. Let animals be led in with soft confusion in their eyes. Let neighbors watch and murmur, half curious, half amused. Because every age has people who laugh at the one building for a storm no one else can see. Maybe Atrahasis looks foolish. Most people who prepare for the unthinkable look foolish until the first impossible sound arrives. A hammer falls. Wood answers. Another hammer. Another breath. The vessel rises like a dark shape against the dimming sky. It is not elegant. It is not made for beauty. It is made for survival, and survival has its own rough holiness. Above all of this, the gods know. That is the heart of the source story, the unsettling center. We have often been taught to imagine the flood as a divine sentence, delivered from above by beings who are fully in control. Humanity has become too loud, too corrupt, too many, too unruly. Enlil demands silence. The waters come. The guilty world is washed away. But the old account gives us details that do not sit comfortably inside that simple frame. When the storm arrives, the gods do not behave like calm judges. They flee upward. They retreat to the high heaven of Anu. And there, the text says in its ancient way, they crouch like dogs against a wall. Let that image rest for a moment in the warm dark of this room. Not because it is loud, because it is strange. Gods pressed against a wall. Gods afraid. Gods who had made humans, ruled cities, received offerings, commanded workers, shaped life from clay and blood, now huddled like frightened animals while the world below is swallowed by water. This is not the posture of victory. It is the posture of escape. The first day of rain breaks open the sky. The wind moves across the plain with a force that bends the reeds flat. Dust becomes mud in the streets. Roofs shudder. Lamps go out, one by one. People wake to the sound of water striking walls, courtyards, boats, baskets, fields, temple steps. The rivers rise, but it is more than river water. The old stories speak as if the deep itself has opened, as if the fountains below and the windows above have both given way. Water from beneath, water from above. The world caught between two vast mouths. The vessel of Atrahasis lifts, slowly at first, with a groan of wood and rope, then more fully, as the ground disappears beneath it. Inside, breath gathers in the dark. Animals shift. Someone whispers. Someone, perhaps, tries not to cry. The smell is close and living. Wet wood, pitch, grain, vool, fear, warm bodies, old smoke trapped in clothing. Outside, the city dissolves. Not all at once. That would almost be easier to imagine. Instead, the familiar world loses its edges. A street becomes a channel. A courtyard becomes a pool. A threshold vanishes. The lower steps of a temple are covered. Then the next. Then the next. The offering tables are soaked. Clay walls soften under the assault. Bricks made from earth begin to remember they were mud. And above, the gods are not feasting. They are hungry. This detail is so small that it becomes enormous. The old account says the gods suffer because the offerings stop. No humans bring bread. No one pours beer. No one tends the smoke. The divine households, so carefully maintained through ritual, are suddenly cut off. The gods who seemed above need are revealed as connected to the world they are leaving behind. They weep. The goddess cries out over the destruction of her people. The lament sounds too wounded for someone merely watching a planned punishment unfold. It sounds like regret. It sounds like horror. It sounds like the voice of someone who agreed to a decision and then, when the consequences became visible, could not bear the sight. This is why the darker reading has such power. If the gods planned everything, why do they seem so afraid? If the flood is only judgment, why do the judges tremble? If this is justice, why does it feel like evacuation? Some scholars would say the language is poetic, that the gods fear because ancient myths often make divine beings emotionally vivid. That is fair. We must not pretend certainty where the clay offers only broken light. But when we read the flood as a possible cover for departure, many strange fragments begin to lean toward one another. Enlil wanted the human noise ended. Perhaps that is true. But perhaps something else was coming too. Perhaps the flood was not the weapon, but the event, not the punishment itself, but the catastrophe that made departure necessary. Perhaps Enlil understood that Earth was about to become dangerous, or useless, or impossible to govern. Perhaps the order he gave was not simply destroy them, but we cannot remain, and we cannot take them with us. That is a colder sentence. Not hatred. Abandonnement. Enki's warning then changes shape. It becomes not only compassion, but preservation. A desperate attempt to save one seed from a field about to be drowned. He cannot stop the council. He cannot openly break the oath. He cannot stand in the middle of the city and tell everyone what is coming. So he speaks to a wall. A wall listens. A man builds. A remnant survives. I have always found this more haunting than open thunder. The idea that humanity continues because one god found a loophole. It is almost funny, in a tired way, like the universe being saved by careful wording. But beneath the small cleverness is sorrow. So many are not warned. So much is left beneath water. So many voices become silt. For 7 days and 7 nights, the storm continues. Let the phrase slow down. 7 days, 7 nights. Not as a number only, but as endurance. 1 day of thunder can frighten the body. 2 days can numb it. By the 3rd day, time loses shape. By the 4th, the sound of rain becomes the whole world. By the 5th, memory of dry ground begins to feel unreal. By the 6th, even prayer may grow tired. By the 7th, there is only water, dark wood, breath, and waiting. Inside the vessel, Atrahasis listens. He hears rain on the roof. He hears animals shifting in sleep. He hears the groan of beams. Perhaps he hears things strike the sides in the dark, but we do not need to name them. Let the horror remain outside, softened by rain and distance. His hand rests against the wood. The wood trembles. Every tremor reminds him that survival is not peace. It is only a door still holding. Above, in the heaven of Anu, the gods wait as well. This parallel matters. Humans below, gods above, both enclosed, both hungry, both afraid, both cut off from the world as it was. The flood collapses the great hierarchy into shared helplessness. The rulers and the ruled are all waiting for water to finish speaking. When the storm finally lessens, silence does not return at once. First, there is dripping. Then, the dull slap of waves. Then, the creaking of the vessel. Then, birds. Perhaps small wings in a washed world. The air smells different. Cleaner, yes, but also emptied. Like a room after everything has been carried out. Atrahasis opens a way to look out. The world is water and fragments. The rivers have forgotten their banks. Fields have become a pale expanse. Cities are hidden below. Temples rise only as broken shapes, if they rise at all. The old roads are gone. The old boundaries are gone. The old noise is gone. Enlil's desired silence has arrived. But at what cost? When the surviving human offers sacrifice, the gods gather around the smell. The text gives this moment an almost embarrassing intimacy. They come like flies to the offering. That image is not flattering. It makes the gods seem needy, relieved, drawn by hunger. Again, the divine beings do not appear as ushtable abstractions. They appear connected to human ritual in ways that make their absence from Earth more complicated. Enlil discovers that humans survived and grows angry. Enki defends what he has done, or at least explains the necessity. The human remnant will continue, but under new limits. Life will not be as it was before. Mortality will tighten. Some births will fail. Some women will not bear children. Death will become a stronger wall. The human population will be managed not only by disaster, but by design woven into ordinary life. The old world is over. And this is where the flood becomes not an ending, but a curtain. Behind it, the gods withdraw. The survivors, looking upon a ruined world, can easily believe the divine ones have judged them. Why would they think otherwise? Water destroyed the cities. The gods vanished into heaven. The old order ended. The simplest explanation is anger. The gods were displeased. Humanity had sinned. The flood was punishment. But another possibility remains beneath the surface, like a buried tablet. Perhaps the flood explained the absence. Perhaps it gave later generations a story they could live with. Better to believe the gods punished us than to believe they fled without us. Better to believe we were corrected than abandoned. Punishment still implies relationship. Abandonment is colder. Punishment says the father is angry. Abandonment says the house is empty. So the survivors begin again. They step onto wet earth. Their feet sink. The mud is soft, almost newborn. The sky is huge and pale above them. Every sound feels too clear. A bird call. Water dripping from a broken branch. A child breathing. The scrape of a hand against damp wood. They carry what can be carried. Seeds. Stories. Fear. The memory of a warning spoken through reeds. And somewhere, perhaps already far above or far away, the Anunnaki are no longer where they were. This is the first great silence. Not complete yet. Not final. The old texts suggest that divine presence lingers in some ways after the flood. Cities will rise again. Temples will be rebuilt. Kings will claim authority from heaven. Priests will serve the statues. Omens will be read. But something has shifted. The age before and the age after are not the same. The numbers begin to shrink. The lifespans shorten. The world grows heavier. The directness fades. The flood has washed more than land. It has washed away a closeness. Near our fire, the room remains warm. The candle flame bends and straightens. The rain in the story becomes only a sound inside the mind. Steady, distant, almost calming now that it belongs to long ago. But the question remains awake. If the gods were in control, why were they afraid? And if they were afraid, what did they know that humanity did not? The waters recede slowly, and beneath them, the first empty temples wait to be found. After the waters, silence becomes the oldest ruin. It settles first on the broken fields, then on the riverbanks, then in the temple courts where offerings once rose every morning in fragrant smoke. Silence enters the cracks between bricks. It gathers in the corners of sanctuaries. It rests on pedestals where divine statues once stood. It lies across the tablets not yet written, waiting for scribes who will try, centuries later, to explain why the gods grew distant. The flood is not the last moment of the story. It is the hinge. The door swings, the world turns, and on the other side there is a long age of absence. At first, perhaps, no one understands it. That is important. Absence rarely announces itself honestly. It begins as delay. A god does not answer today. The oracle is unclear. The dream does not come. The omen contradicts the last omen. The priest assumes a mistake has been made. The hymn was imperfect. The offering was late. The ritual vessel was not purified enough. The calendar was misread. There is always one more explanation before the mind accepts that the room may truly be empty. Imagine a priest in the early morning. The temple is still cool from the night. Outside, the first light has not yet reached the upper walls. Inside, an oil lamp trembles in a shallow bowl. The priest carries bread, beer, water, clean cloth, and incense. His footsteps are soft, not because the floor demands it, but because the habit of reverence has entered his bones. He has done this before. His father did it before him. His father before him. The god must be awakened. The god must be washed. The god must be fed. He draws aside the curtain. The pedestal waits. Perhaps the statue is still there in some places, dressed and jeweled, eyes of shell and stone reflecting the lamp. But the presence that once filled it is gone. Or perhaps, in other temples, the statue itself has vanished. Only the mark of it remains. A smoother patch on the base. A stain from oil. Dust gathered around the shape of absence. The priest sets down the bread anyway. What else can he do? This is the sorrow preserved in the lament texts of ancient Mesopotamia. The lament for the laments for Sumer and Ur, the laments for Nippur and other cities. They speak of destruction, yes, but beneath the broken walls and scattered people is something deeper. The gods withdraw. The divine patrons leave their sanctuaries. The cities fall after the protective presence is gone. That order matters. If a city is destroyed and then its god departs, the story is simple. The temple is ruined. The cult ends. The deity has no house. But the laments often make the departure feel earlier, more terrible, more causal. The goddess leaves. The god abandons the shrine. The protection is lifted. Then the walls fall. Then fire comes. Then the people scatter. The city dies because heaven has stepped away. In Ur, the goddess Ningal weeps for her city. Her grief is not distant. It is intimate, almost unbearably human. She pleads. She laments. She sees the disaster, yet cannot stop it. In these poems, the gods are not always all-powerful. They are bound by decrees, by councils, by fates, by decisions made beyond even their own desire. That makes the sadness stranger. It is not only that humans are abandoned. Sometimes Even the gods seem unable to remain. The ruins hold this mood. At Eridu, the ancient city of Enki, temples were built one above another over long ages, each new sacred structure rising on the footprint of the old, layer upon layer, like memory, refusing to move. Archaeologists found repeated rebuilding, careful continuity, the same holy place renewed again and again. That alone is moving. It means generations believed that exact spot mattered. Not somewhere nearby. Not a more convenient mound. There. A temple is not only a building in such a world. It is an address. And if the god no longer answers at that address, the loneliness becomes architectural. Picture the final sanctuaries. A room cleared with care. Offering tables still in place. Floors swept. Storage niches empty. Doorways sealed. Not always the chaos one expects from conquest. Not always the smashed disorder of looting. In some places, the pattern suggests removal, closure, departure. We must be cautious. Archaeology does not speak in one simple voice. Sacred objects can be looted. Statues made of precious material can be taken and melted. Temples can be cleaned out by priests before invasion. Later, builders can disturb earlier layers. A missing statue does not prove a god boarded a vessel and left the planet. It proves a statue is missing. And yet, in the mood of the source story, the pattern matters. Again and again, the most sacred objects are gone. The divine statue, the living body of the god in ritual imagination, is absent. The pedestal remains. The architecture remains. The marks of service remain. But the one object around which the whole temple life revolved is missing. In Mesopotamian religion, the cult statue was not a mere decoration. It was treated as the earthly body of the deity. It was washed, clothed, fed, perfumed, sungto, awakened and put to sleep. The statue received the god. It made presence local. It turned the impossible distance between heaven and earth into a daily relationship of bread, oil, cloth, and prayer. So when these statues vanish, something more than art is missing. The house has lost its inhabitant. The source story leans into this disappearance and asks us to imagine organized withdrawal. Not random looting, but a taking away. Sacred items gathered. Ritual instruments removed. Doors sealed. Some spaces calmly closed. Others abandoned in haste. At Uruk, the great city of Gilgamesh, traditions and excavated patterns can be read in this eerie way. Some rooms cleared with ritual care, some areas left with the feeling of interruption, as if time had run out. I find that mixture convincing as atmosphere, even when the evidence must remain debated. Calm in one corridor, panic in another. A swept floor beside a dropped vessel. A sealed room near a half-emptied storehouse. That is how real departures often look. Not one mood, but several. Someone had warning. Someone did not. Someone packed carefully. Someone ran back for one last thing and never finished. The temple inventories add another whisper. Administrative tablets in Mesopotamia could be astonishingly precise. Lists of grain, animals, garments, vessels, offerings, laborers, land. These were people who could make holiness bureaucratic, which sounds odd until one remembers that ritual depends on exactness. If the god receives bread each morning, someone must record the flour. If the statue wears linen, someone must track the cloth. Heaven had accounts. Some texts and later interpretations speak of sacred items taken to heaven or ascending with divine owners. Mainstream scholars may understand such phrases through ritual, politics, or mythic language. The alternative reading hears evacuation, taken upward, removed from earth, not stolen, not destroyed, departed. Let us step into one of those rooms in imagination. The air is still. Dust lies in a thin skin over the floor. The doorway has been sealed with clay impressed by a sacred sign. A small lamp once stood in a niche, now empty. On the wall, smoke has darkened the plaster near the ceiling. In the center, a stone base waits, its top worn smooth by years of oil and cloth and touch. Something stood there for centuries. Something received prayers. Something was believed to look back. Now there is only the pedestal. And yet the priests keep coming. This is the part that turns dread into sorrow. Because human beings are very good at waiting. Painfully good. Beautifully good. We can keep a lamp lit long after the one it was lit for has gone. We can set a bowl in an empty place because not setting it there feels worse. We can repeat words whose first meaning has faded because stopping them would admit too much. The priest enters each morning. He sings. He pours water. He offers bread. He listens. No answer. The next day, again. No answer. A month. A year. A lifetime. At first he thinks the silence is a test, then a punishment, then a mystery. His son inherits the office. His son inherits the same silence, but perhaps not the memory of anything else. By the third generation, the absence has become tradition. No one alive has seen the radiance. No one has heard the voice. But the rite remains, and the rite itself becomes a raft on a dark sea. This is how abandoned worship survives. The form outlives the contact. The gesture outlives the presence. The waiting becomes the religion. The laments preserve the wound. They are not dry documents. They ache. Their cities are not only political centers. They are living bodies, emptied of divine breath. Gates groan. Streets mourn. Storehouses fail. Mothers cry. The goddess weeps but cannot prevent the decree. The god has gone from his house. The people ask why, and the answer changes depending on who is brave enough to speak. The gods were angry. The gods withdrew. The gods were taken. The gods fled. The source story asks us to notice that the destruction of cities often follows divine withdrawal. It asks us to imagine that the collapse of civilization was not the cause of the gods leaving, But the result of it, remove the maintaining presence, and the system fails. Remove the divine administrators, and the human order trembles. Remove those who taught the measurements, guarded the rituals, stabilized the hierarchy, and the temples become beautiful shells. Whether we read that literally or mythically, the emotional truth is strong. Civilizations do collapse when their central presence disappears. A king dies, and a kingdom fractures. A language is lost, and a library becomes mute. A teacher leaves, and the students keep repeating the lesson without understanding why the order matters. A god departs, and the temple becomes architecture. From the empty rooms, the story lifts its eyes again to the sky. Because the Mesopotamians watched the heavens with remarkable devotion. Their astronomers tracked stars and planets, eclipses and omens, risings and settings, patterns across long years. Later, Babylonian astronomy reached levels of precision that still impress modern scholars. The sky was not decoration. It was a text. It was a calendar. It was a mirror of divine intention. It was perhaps, in the darker reading, a warning system. Most astronomical tablets are calm, methodical, patient. They feel like careful minds recording what returns in order. The moon, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, eclipses, seasonal stars. But among the wider omen tradition are references to strange lights, wandering stars, appearances that cause fear, objects that do not fit easily into routine categories. Many can be explained as comets, meteors, novae, atmospheric effects, or symbolic omen language. That is the careful view, and it deserves respect. Yet the story asks us to imagine a different possibility. What if some sky records preserved urgency? What if the watchers of Babylon were not only predicting eclipses for kings, but preserving memories of celestial danger? What if a strange object, a returning cycle, a visitor from the deep sky, or a disaster linked to the heavens stood behind the oldest stories of flood and departure? The idea remains debated. It is not settled history, but in a sleep story, we may hold it gently, not as proof, but as a dark lantern. A scribe stands on a rooftop in the cool night. Below him, the city is quiet. Above him, the stars are painfully clear. He has a tablet in one hand. The clay is damp enough to receive marks. Beside him, a lamp is shielded from the wind. He knows where the familiar light should be. He knows their paths. His teachers knew. Their teachers knew. The sky is an old manuscript. Then something appears where nothing should appear. He waits. He measures. He records. He does not panic, because scribes are trained to make marks even when the heart beats faster. But his hand presses the stylus a little too deep. A wandering light. A crossing point. A sign. Later readers will debate the meaning. Was it Jupiter? Akume? A star? A mythic symbol? A misunderstood term? A planet that never existed? A metaphor for divine order? The clay does not rise from its drawer and settle the matter for us. It simply waits. Meanwhile, on Earth, the temples grow quieter. The priests continue their calendars. The offerings continue where they can. The laments are copied. Old texts are preserved because someone believes the past contains a key. A king centuries later will gather tablets in a library at Nineveh, collecting myths, omens, rituals, medical texts, star records, and epics as if afraid that the world might forget itself. When that library burns, the clay hardens, and destruction becomes preservation. It is almost too poetic to be invented, which is usually how history likes to behave when it is showing off. So the silence after the flood becomes full of records. Records of absence. Records of longing. Records of sky watching. Records of gods who once lived in houses and then were gone. The question deepens. If they left because humanity failed, then the empty temples are evidence of judgment. If they left because something came from the sky, then the empty temples are evidence of evacuation. If they were recalled by a higher power, then the empty temples are the offices of a closed outpost. If humanity or the hybrids became too difficult to control, then the empty temples are the remains of a retreat. No answer is gentle, but some are colder than others. Near the fire, we do not have to choose tonight. We only have to follow the footprints as far as they go. Clay, vata, dust, missing statues, shrinking numbers, silent rooms. A sky watched by people who had not yet forgotten that heaven might move. The old priest sets down the bread again. The pedestal waits. The smoke rises into nothing visible. And, far above the temple roof, the stars keep their own counsel. The stars give no answer, but the old scribes kept watching them. Night after night, above the roofs of Babylon and Nineveh, men climbed the temple platforms with tablets wrapped in damp cloth. Below them, the city breathed in sleep. Dogs turned in alleys. Lamps died behind reed doors. Somewhere in a temple room, a priest placed bread before a presence that no longer answered as it once had. Above them, the sky moved with perfect coldness. The Babylonians were not careless dreamers staring upward and inventing shapes. They watched with discipline. They recorded the moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, eclipses, halos, risings, settings, and the slow return of lights that obeyed patterns. Their heavens were not empty. They were a dark tablet, written in fire. Most of the time, the sky behaved. That is what makes the strange entries feel so uneasy. Some tablets speak of wandering lights, strange stars, appearances that do not fit neatly into ordinary categories. Some scholars would say these were comets, meteors, new stars, weather in the upper air, or symbolic omen language. That may be true. We should be gentle with certainty here. Old clay does not rise from the drawer and explain itself. Yet imagine one scribe on a roof, wrapped in a wool cloak against the night air. He knows where the familiar stars should be. He knows the dignity of Jupiter, the bright hunger of Venus, the red unease of Mars. His teacher knew. his teacher before him knew. Then something appears where nothing should be. It moves with its own intention. He does not scream. A trained scribe records first and trembles later. The stylus enters the clay. One mark. Another. A warning becomes paperwork. This is where the story opens into the first great possibility. Perhaps the Anunnaki left because the human experiment frightened them. In the beginning, humanity worked. That was the purpose. Humans dug canals, carried earth, tended fields, made offerings, and fed the divine houses. The system functioned. The Agigi no longer bore the labor. The gods were served. But humans did not remain simple. They multiplied. They spoke. They learned. They made markets, songs, walls, boats, laws, tools, and memories. Their noise rose to the heavens, and Enlil was troubled. On the surface, this sounds almost petty, as if the Lord of Command simply wanted quieter neighbors. Honestly, if humanity was anything like it is now, I can understand needing a little silence. Still, a flood seems a bit much for a noise complaint. The noise may have meant more than sound. It may have meant activity, coordination, signal, a species becoming dense with its own life, workers talking to workers, families becoming clans, clans becoming cities, cities becoming powers, a servant species beginning to understand the house in which it served. Then came the deeper danger, the mixing of divine and human lines. Later traditions speak of the sons of God and the daughters of men, and of the Nephilim, mighty beings of old. Mesopotamian stories hold their own echoes. Gods with humans, goddesses with kings, heroes with blood from both worlds. Gilgamesh himself is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. A strange measure, but a powerful idea. A hybrid is a living problem for hierarchy. If humans are only workers, they can be ruled. If gods are only gods, they can remain above. But if a being carries both, the ladder between earth and heaven becomes a road. From Enlil's view, this may have looked like contamination. From Enki's view, perhaps it looked like promise. From humanity's view, if anyone dared to think it, it may have looked like destiny. The old king lists make this feeling stranger. Before the flood, rulers reign for impossible lengths, thousands and tens of thousands of years. Most scholars read those numbers as symbolic, not literal history. That is reasonable. But inside the story, the numbers matter. They make the old world feel longer, larger, less confined. After the flood, the numbers shrink. Life grows shorter. Kings become less immense. Human time tightens. If someone wished to limit a species, shortened life would be a quiet tool. A being who lives 900 years can gather memory in one body. A being who lives 90 must pass memory through fragile hands. Songs break. Teachings blur. Children forget what grandfathers knew. Clay must carry what flesh cannot. So the first theory is dark because it places the fear inside us. The Anunnaki may have left not because humanity failed, but because humanity succeeded too well. The clay learned to speak. The worker learned to wonder. The servant looked upward and saw not only gods, but a possible future. Let that thought rest by the fire. We do not need to believe it fully. We only need to feel why it has power. The second possibility turns the fear back toward the sky. Perhaps the gods did not flee humanity. Perhaps they fled what was coming. Flood stories across the world speak of broken skies, rising waters, fire, darkness, and worlds remade. Some researchers connect deep flood memories to real climate shocks, including the sudden cold period called the Younger Dryas. The idea of a cosmic impact or comet fragments remains debated. Some accept parts of it. Others reject it. Still, the image fits the old fear. A light appears. Calculations change. The gods prepare. The flood arrives. In this reading, the flood is not punishment. It is symptom. The gods do not send the waters with calm authority. They see danger and retreat. The old account says they cower in the heaven of Anu, hungry and weeping while the storm rages below. That image returns again and again. Gods against a wall. Not rulers celebrating judgment. Refugees waiting for catastrophe to pass. If they had known Earth would be struck, flooded, shaken, or thrown into disorder, they may have saved what they could and left what they could not. Enki preserves Atrahasis, not because the council is merciful, but because one faction cannot bear to let the whole experiment vanish. When the waters recede, the world is damaged. Temples are ruined. Fields are gone. Cities are mud. Human numbers are reduced. Perhaps the gods look down and decide the outpost is no longer worth maintaining. Or perhaps they intend to return, but the road back becomes longer than anyone expected. Below, humanity rebuilds with broken memory. Above, the stars return to their old paths. The scribes keep watching, because somewhere inside their tradition is the suspicion that heaven once moved against the earth and may move again. The scribes kept watching because memory had become a form of survival. By the time later hands copied the oldest traditions, much had already been lost. Every tablet is both treasure and wound. It preserves a voice, but it also shows us where the voice is broken. A corner is gone. A line is missing. A name has crumbled. A sign can mean one thing or another, or something no one can recover because the world that used it is dust. So when we ask why the Anunnaki left, we are not opening a complete archive. We are kneeling beside scattered clay after a storm. Still, the pattern remains. One possibility says humanity became too capable. Another says the sky became too dangerous. The third possibility is quieter, almost ordinary, and for that reason, it chills in a different way. What if they were recalled? Not defeated. Not terrified. Not driven away by water or revolt. Simply ordered home. In the divine hierarchy, the Anunnaki were not always the highest powers. Above them stood Anu, the sky, father, remote and difficult to reach. The gods who worked on earth may have been administrators, royal agents, governors of a distant project. Earth, in this reading, was not their home. It was an assignment, a station, an outpost, a very muddy workplace with difficult local conditions. I know, that sounds a little too modern. As if Enlil was filing complaints about canal maintenance. But myths often become clearer when we remove a little gold from the statues. Someone assigned labor. Someone managed resources. Someone created workers. Someone received offerings. Someone kept order. This is not only religion. It has the shape of administration. If the assignment ended, the gods would leave. Pack the sacred objects. Clear the inner rooms. Seal the doors. Withdraw the personnel. The project is complete. This theory explains some things neatly. The creation of humanity becomes part of a long plan. The teaching of civilization becomes training. The departure becomes the end of supervision. The promise of return becomes a future inspection, or perhaps a kindness spoken to a species not ready to hear goodbye. But something does not fit. The laments do not sound like graduation songs. The priests do not seem prepared. The temples do not feel handed over with calm instructions. They feel bereaved. A planned departure should leave clarity. Instead, the records feel full of confusion. The god has left. The city has fallen. Why does he not answer? Why does the ritual fail? Why does the dream not come? This is not how students sound when a teacher says, "You are ready now." This is how children sound when a house goes quiet and no one explains why. Perhaps the recall was sudden. Perhaps something happened above Earth, in the realm of Anu, beyond the reach of human tablets. A crisis among the gods. A command. A conflict. A celestial war. A division between factions. The myths preserve rivalries between Enlil and Enki, between city gods, between powers of storm, water, sky, and earth. Heaven in these stories is not peaceful. It argues like a council room with too many proud voices. In that case, some gods may have wanted to stay. Enki, especially, feels like one who might have been reluctant. He protects Atrahasis. He teaches. He bends rules. He preserves seeds of life when others choose silence. If a recall came, perhaps he left behind what he could. Stories, rituals, measurements, warnings, patterns in the stars, instructions hidden in myth. Maybe that is why clay matters. A god can leave. A tablet can remain. Clay does not need offerings. It does not need a temple roof. It can sleep under ash, sand, broken brick, and empire after empire, until someone with patient eyes learns to read it again. The fourth possibility is more dangerous. What if the Anunnaki left because they lost control? The Agigi rebellion had already shown that workers can refuse. Divine workers burn their tools at Enlil's gate, Humanity was created to replace them. But what happens when the replacement workers learn the same lesson? The Tower of Babel story gives a later echo. Humanity speaks one language. Humanity works together. Humanity begins to build upward, toward heaven. The divine response is immediate. The reason is startling. If humans continue as one people, nothing they plan will be impossible for them. That is not annoyance. That is fear. The tower may not need to be a literal structure piercing the clouds. It may be a symbol of unified human ability. Shared language, shared labor, shared ambition, shared technology. When people understand one another, they can build. When they build together, they become difficult to rule. So the languages are confused. Humanity is scattered. Coordination is broken. A divided species is easier to manage than a united one. The hybrid beings make this more troubling. If Nephilim, demigods, mighty kings, or semi-divine rulers carried both human numbers and divine traits, they could become leaders around whom resistance gathered. A hybrid king can stand in temple and battlefield at once. He can tell humans that the blood of heaven is not only above them, but among them. Many cultures remember battles between gods and giants, gods and titans, divine rulers and rebellious beings who stand between categories. Each myth has its own home and should not be forced into one mold. Yet the echo is real. There is often an ancient war at the border between mortal and immortal. In this fourth theory, the gods withdraw, not because they are weak, but because remaining has become costly. They may win battles, but lose control of the future. They may punish cities, but not erase memory. They may shorten life, confuse languages, and flood the world, but the clay keeps learning. So they retreat. They wait. Time becomes their ally. Human leaders die. Alliance fracture. Languages drift. Floods bury records. Children inherit stories without instructions. After enough generations, rebellion becomes myth, and the old rulers become gods again, safely distant. That is the coldest version of the promised return. It is not comfort. It is a power waiting to come back when the world is ready to obey again. Perhaps that is too dark. Perhaps the Anunnaki are only mythic figures through which ancient people explained floods, kingship, work, death, and the strange burden of being human. That may be the cautious reading. But even then, the story is not empty. It tells us ancient people understood power. They knew rulers fear the voices beneath them. They knew labor can become rebellion. They knew language can unite or divide. They knew memory is dangerous. 4 possibilities now sit beside the fire. The creators feared what humanity became. They fled a danger in the sky. They were recalled by a higher power. They withdrew because control was slipping away. Perhaps one is true. Perhaps none. Perhaps all preserve pieces of something too large for one tablet to hold. Real history is rarely clean. It is layered, messy, late, frightened, and full of decisions no one explains to the people who suffer them. What remains is the departure. The gods become distant. The temples continue. The priests wait. The laments ache. The astronomers watch. The tablets are copied because someone believes the old words may one day matter again. And the waiting does not remain in Mesopotamia. It travels, or perhaps it appears everywhere because the wound is everywhere. The waiting travels beyond the rivers. It leaves Eridu, Uruk, Ur, and Nippur. It leaves the clay tablets and broken platforms. It rises with incense from empty sanctuaries and moves into other lands, other tongues, other sacred memories. People who never wrote in cuneiform, never spoke Sumerian, and never built temples beside the Euphrates, still told stories with the same quiet shape. There was a time when the gods were near. They taught. They ruled. They walked among us. Then they left. That pattern is simple, but its simplicity is what makes it so powerful. A gift of knowledge, a direct presence, a rupture, a withdrawal, a promise of return. In Egypt, the old texts remember a first time, an age when Ra ruled directly upon earth. The sun god was not only a light in the sky, he was king among beings. The world was young, and the distance between heaven and earth had not yet widened. But humanity grew restless. People whispered against Ra. The old god became angered and sent the fierce goddess Sekhmet to punish them. Then mercy intervened. Beer was dyed red and spread across the fields. Sekhmet drank. Her fury softened, and humanity was spared. Yet Ra no longer remained on earth. He rose into heaven on the back of the celestial cow. The gods withdrew. The sun still crossed the sky, but now from a distance. Visible, but unreachable. Present, but gone. Egypt was left with pharaohs, rituals, temples, and memory. Divine rule became symbolic, ceremonial, acted out in stone and gold because the living nearness had faded. In India, the pattern returns in another form. The Devas, the Shining Ones, move through the old Sanskrit epics and sacred traditions. Gods speak with humans. Divine weapons blaze in stories of war. Krishna walks among people in physical form, guiding, teaching, smiling with a mystery that seems both human and endless. Then he departs. With that departure, an age closes. Kali Yuga begins, the dark age of confusion, decline, and distance. The divine has not vanished, but direct contact has thinned. Humanity must search through scripture, devotion, discipline, and longing. This is a softer kind of abandonment, but still abandonment. A door remains, yet it opens inward now. In Greece, the poets remembered ages of the world. The Golden Age, when humans lived close to gods and died as softly as sleep. The Heroic Age, when gods still walked among mortals, loved them, deceived them, fought beside them, and fathered children who became heroes. Then came the Iron Age. The gods became distant. They spoke through signs, dreams, omens, and oracles. Even those voices eventually weakened. Delphi, once the mouth of Apollo, fell silent. A spring that had spoken became only water. That image stays with me. A spring that once carried prophecy becomes ordinary water. A mountain that once housed gods becomes only stone. The absence does not always arrive as fire. Sometimes it arrives as the loss of meaning in a place that still looks the same. In China, old traditions speak of culture, heroes, and celestial emperors who brought order, medicina, writing, music, agriculture, and ritual. The Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, after a long and wondrous reign, is carried upward by a dragon. Some try to cling to the dragon and fall back to earth. Only the chosen ascend. The tomb remains, but no body lies there. How could there be a body if the ruler returned to heaven? Across the ocean, in the Andes, the Inca remembered Viracocha, a creator and teacher connected with the waters of Lake Titicaca. He walked among early peoples, shaping and instructing, then departed across the Pacific, moving into the sunset with a promise of return. Some details recorded by Spanish chroniclers must be handled carefully, because conquest distorted many sacred memories. Still, the departure across water remains haunting. A teacher walks away over the sea. The people remain on shore. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, carries another memory of a civilizing figure who brings knowledge and order, then leaves toward the east with a promise to return. Later history made that expectation dangerous when Europeans arrived, and some saw prophecy in the sails. A promised return can become a wound when the wrong stranger appears. Among the Hopi, traditions of the Kachina beings preserve a different kind of withdrawal. The Kachinas once lived more directly among the people, teaching and guiding. Then they withdrew to sacred places, to mountains and hidden homes. Ceremony became the bridge. Mask, dance, song, and seasonal rhythm kept the relationship alive. Again, the presence becomes ritual. The living becomes remembered. The open door becomes a symbol. This pattern appears in many forms. Gods ascend. Teachers sail away. Spirits withdraw into mountains. Divine rulers return to the sky. Sacred beings hide below the earth or beyond ordinary sight. Different cultures, different languages, different landscapes. Zame Ache. Why? One answer is psychology. Humans long for lost parents, lost teachers, and a world that once made more sense. We imagine a golden age because the present hurts. We imagine return because grief wants a door. That is a wise answer. Another answer is diffusion. Stories travel through traders, migrants, prisoners, marriages, vars, and priests. A myth can cross borders more easily than an army. An old Near Eastern pattern may have moved far, changed names, and settled into new sacred worlds. But the darker possibility is that many cultures remember a similar kind of event because something like it happened broadly, or happened so deeply that it entered the oldest layers of human memory. Perhaps there were several departures. Perhaps different beings left at different times. Perhaps catastrophes came in layers. One in deep prehistory, another around the rise of the first cities, another during later collapses. Memory may have pressed them together into one story of gods who came, taught, withdrew, and promised return. Memory is not a clean ledger. It is more like river silt. Layer over layer, flood over field, old bones under new grass. The exact dates blur. Around 3000 before the Common Era, Sumerian civilization crystallizes. Egyptian dynastic history begins. And later, Hindu chronology places a great age transition near that broad threshold. Other echoes may point much farther back, toward flood memories, climate shocks, and the end of older ways of life. We cannot make the timeline obey us, but we can notice the shape. They were here. They taught us. Something changed. They left. They said they would return. The waiting began. Let that rest softly. Not as proof. Us Wunder. Near the fire, the room is quiet. Somewhere in imagination, Ra rises beyond reach. Krishna leaves the earth. Apollo's spring falls silent. Huangdi ascends. Viracocha vanishes across the sea. Quetzalcoatl disappears into the east. The Kachinas withdraw into sacred mountains. And in Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki leave their temples behind. The names differ, but the empty place feels familiar. Humanity inherits the rituals, the stories, the questions, and the habit of looking upward as if the sky once spoke. The sky once spoke, or perhaps we only remember it that way. This is the final unease in the story. Not only why the Anunnaki left, not only whether they fled in fear, obeyed a recall, escaped a disaster, or retreated from humanity itself. The deeper question is quieter. Did all of them leave? The ancient world is full of beings who remain at the edges. Watchers, guardians, hidden teachers, spirits under hills, angels in fields, wise ones beneath mountains, shining figures who no longer live openly among people, but have not entirely gone. In the Book of Enoch, there are watchers, divine beings sent to observe humanity. Some teach forbidden knowledge. Some cross boundaries. Some are punished and bound beneath the earth. The text comes from a later religious world, but it carries echoes that feel older. Beings from above. Knowledge given to humans. Forbidden unions. Judgment. Concealment. Watchers complicate absence. If the gods left completely, humanity was abandoned. If some stayed, humanity has been observed. Neither thought is simple. Across Europe, folklore speaks of luminous beings in hollow hills, fairy courts, hidden kingdoms, and encounters where time bends strangely. These are not the harmless winged creatures of modern decoration. In older stories, the fair folk can be proud, dangerous, beautiful, ancient, and cold. They live near humanity, but not quite with it. They remember older laws. In Hopi traditions, beings shelter humanity during catastrophe and remain connected to hidden places. Tibetan and Central Asian lore speaks of secret realms where wisdom is preserved beyond ordinary access. South American legends remember hidden cities and teachers withdrawn into mountains or beneath the earth. Some of these are spiritual symbols. Some may echo real refuges. Some may be stories about the inner life. We cannot be sure. But the pattern breathes. Those who taught did not always vanish. Some withdrew. Some watched. Some waited. Now, come gently into the modern night. We must be careful here. In recent years, governments and military witnesses have spoken more openly about unidentified aerial phenomena. Pilots have described objects moving in ways difficult to explain by known aircraft. Some reports may be errors, secret technology, sensor confusion, atmospheric effects, or honest misreadings under stress. A wise listener keeps all of that in mind. Still, something has shifted. The topic is no longer only a joke whispered at the edge of serious conversation. There are official hearings, cautious statements, and trained witnesses saying that something unusual has been seen. The source story asks whether modern reports echo ancient descriptions. Radiant lights like divine aura, silent motion, objects that ignore expected movement, watchers in the sky, a return not announced by trumpets, but by observation. No proof, only resonance. And resonance is not certainty. It is the feeling of one string vibrating when another is touched. Imagine a pilot at night. The cockpit glows with small instruments. Outside, the sky is black and deep. He knows planes, stars, weather, speed, distance. Then something appears. It moves too quickly, stops too suddenly, or changes direction without behaving like any machine he knows. For one moment, the modern world becomes ancient again. A human being looks upward and realizes the sky has not finished explaining itself. If the Anunnaki, or whatever memory lies behind them, once left because of danger, perhaps the danger has passed. If they withdrew because humanity was not ready, perhaps they are measuring readiness. If they feared what we might become, perhaps they are returning to see whether that fear was justified. What would they find now? Not the first canal workers, not the frightened survivors of flood, not priests setting bread before empty statues. They would find cities glowing at night like nets of fire. They would find machines circling Earth. They would find footprints on the moon. They would find atoms split, genomes read, oceans mapped, and artificial minds learning to speak in human patterns. They would also find us still foolish, very foolish. We can send instruments beyond planets and still lose patience with a slow door. We can study ancient wisdom and still argue over nothing before breakfast. Humanity is a strange little miracle, half genius, half spilled soup. But we are not what we were. If the old stories are literal, the created has grown far beyond the assigned task. If they are symbolic, the symbol has still come true. Humanity has become the creature that looks back. So return would not be simple comfort. If the old teachers came back, would we kneel? Would we rejoice? Would we ask for explanations? Would we demand apology? For the flood, if they knew. For the silence, if they chose it. For the shortened years, if such a thing was done. For the empty temples, for the long waiting that became prayer. Empire, ritual, grief, art, science, and longing. Or perhaps they would say something softer. Perhaps they would say they never meant to abandon us. Perhaps they left warnings in clay and stars because they could not stay. Perhaps the silence was not punishment, but space. A terrible space. Yes, but space in which humanity could grow. Without gods openly walking beside us, we had to become keepers of our own flame. Return now to Eridu one last time. Evening settles over the southern plain. The heat leaves the mud brick. The broken platforms darken under the first stars. Archaeologists have gone. Their brushes and notebooks are packed away. The wind moves softly through the ruins. The old city does not answer, but it holds. It holds the memory of water. It holds temples built over temples. It holds the absence of Enki, if he was ever there, as the stories say. It holds the footsteps of priests who climbed before dawn. It holds hands that shaped bricks, lips that sang hymns, eyes that watched the sky. Imagine the last priest. He climbs slowly. His knees ache. Morning is still gray. In his hands, he carries bread, beer, and clean water. He knows the words because his father taught him. His father learned them from another. The first meaning is already fading, but the ritual remains. He enters the sanctuary. The lamp trembles. The pedestal waits. He sets down the offering. For a moment he thinks he hears something. Not a voice. Not a footstep. Only wind moving through a crack in the wall. He waits anyway. That is humanity. Waiting anyway. We wait in temples, laboratories, observatories, libraries, and dreams. We wait for the dead to answer. We wait for the sky to speak. We wait for history to confess what happened. And sometimes, while waiting, we become the answer to another question. The Anunnaki story leaves us with uncertainty. That is not failure. It is inheritance. It asks us to hold mystery without crushing it. Ancient people were not fools because they spoke in gods. They were trying to describe origin, power, lavor, catastrophe, memory, and the ache of being left behind. They used clay, blood, water, heaven, flood, and return. We use evolution, astronomy, climate, genetics, trauma, and civilization. The questions remain. Who made us? Why do we suffer? Why do we remember a golden age? Why do we fear the sky? Why do we long for someone to come back? The candle is low now. The room is warm. Somewhere, clay tablets still sleep in museum drawers. Somewhere, a scholar bends over signs pressed 5,000 years ago. Somewhere, a satellite crosses the old rivers. Somewhere, A child looks up and feels the stars are not only lights. Perhaps the gods left in panic. Perhaps they left in grief. Perhaps they never came as literal beings, but as shapes human minds gave to forces too vast to hold. Perhaps some stayed. Perhaps return will not descend from heaven, but rise inside us as memory becoming wisdom. Let eridu darken. Let the rivers move toward the sea. Let the empty pedestal remain empty tonight. The fire is low. The stars are patient. Good night.